A few weeks ago, we did a video on Kanto Pokemon that I think deserved a bit more respect. The criteria wasn't just in-game stuff though. We talked about the anime, cultural impact, a little competitive niche, and yes, in-game playthroughs and such. Today's video for Johto will be the same. This will probably be a lot easier for me to put together on the fly than Kanto. With the Kanto Pokemon, they're just so iconic, you know? It's hard to call most of them underrated or unnoticed. Gen 2 may be iconic as well, but the new Pokemon never really had the long-term shine that Gen 1 and even Gen 3 Pokemon did. So by using the same vague metrics as the Kanto video, let's talk about some Johto Pokemon that we should appreciate more than fans usually do. And also to clarify again, this is not an ordered list. I'm basically shooting from the hip here. In my worst Johto team video from 2019, or the compilation video if you saw that instead, one of the Pokemon I list immediately for the team is Sentret. Sentret is the region early normal type of the game, like Rattata or Bidoof, with its evolution being, quite frankly, way cuter. Now, Furet is a great HM slave. That might sound like a backhand compliment, but the amount of HMs in Gen 2 are already kinda terrible. If there is one thing Gen 1 did straight up better than Gens 2 through 4, it was having less HMs. Furet can learn one extra HM in Heart Gold and Soul Silver that I've always found annoying. Whirlpool. While I wouldn't bother putting Surf on it due to it actually being good on a water type, being able to not eat up a move slot with Whirlpool because Furet can take it is pretty nice. While I don't care too much for the concept of HM slaves, Furet is one of the earliest Pokemon you can catch and one of the first regional normals that can fulfill the role pretty well. If you don't want to use it that way, it's got a really diverse move pool, but it's not that strong. Though its HP and speed are pretty good for such a basic early game mon. Also, come on, it's cute. This next one is a little weird because we don't ever really talk about it. Qwilfish. Today, it's an alright Pokemon that basically doesn't exist competitively. But in Gen 2, and even the remakes in Gen 4, it's really underrated. In Gen 2 especially, it's a pretty big deal that it can learn Spikes, because barely any Pokemon can. Not even Skarmory can learn Spikes in GSC. You had the Poison type being better in Gen 2, and Water being solid, plus Surf and Sludge? You actually have a surprisingly good Pokemon with some pretty low stats. Unfortunately, its design isn't too appealing or memorable to most of us, so it's not surprising it's often just forgotten. For all the talk of how some of the Johto Pokemon aren't actually that strong, you've got some pretty interesting ones under the radar like Qwilfish. A quick entry here is Granbull. Basically, when this thing was first introduced, that 120 base attack stat was insane for a Pokemon like this. Its normal stab hit like a truck. Its HP is also decent, but the rest of its stats definitely held it back. It would eventually become a fairy type in X and Y, which gave it a brief resurgence, but nothing crazy. Not a Pokemon I think about much, but I think it deserves its props. Another pretty decent Johto Pokemon in Gen 2 that goes under the radar. Next, well, controversial pick, but Noctowl. I know. This thing kinda sucks. The only thing it's really got going for it is its special bulk. Access to Psychic at all was cool back in the day, but that's about it. And no, it's not here just for being the second ever regional bird either. The reason why I'm putting this here is for a similar reason to Pidgeotto and Butterfree. The anime. While Noctowl doesn't have the impact that Butterfree did, it was a very notable part of Ash's team due to it being a shiny. If you got into this series around this time instead of in the late 90s, then this might have been the first shiny you ever saw consistently before Red Gyarados if you hadn't played the games yet. Not to mention, it's hard to believe Ash had a shiny on his roster at all. On top of all this, his Noctowl was actually pretty reliable. While it never ended too many battles, it actually had a better track record than Pidgeotto did. Xatu is another one that I've gone on record saying isn't too good. though it's actually not an unpopular Pokemon. Natu and Xatu have really memorable designs, and honestly, while I think its use, especially before it got Magic Bounce, is limited, it's not that bad. You can't truly be a terrible Pokemon if you have a little speed, special attack, and access to Psychic. But it's Magic Bounce later on that gives it some crazy niche strategies. Go check Smogon for example, and you'll see it has really interesting strategies for the uber meta of all things in 2 totally different generations. That being said, I probably would have forgotten to mention this one here if it weren't for how interesting its design was. Especially back in the year 2000 where there wasn't anything quite like it on the roster. Now, there are 2 grass types I really want to talk about. In fact, you could say the grass types as a whole that were introduced in Johto could use a little more appreciation, like Blossom. But one of the 2 I'm thinking about is Jumpluff. In my worst team video, I noted it was the worst Pokemon on the team. Now, that's kinda true, but also not true at all. It's the worst when you consider its initial form, Hoppip. Hoppip is actually terrible. Just horrible. Gotta respect J-Wits for using it as his channel's mascot though. But once it evolves in the Skiploom, if you really pay attention, you kinda start to understand what this Pokemon is really about. Evolving at level 18, Skiploom gets a really big increase in speed with its level. And with access to the almighty Sleep Powder and other problematic moves like Leech Seed, you're able to start building the most annoying Pokemon in the game. It's ridiculously fast for a Gen 2 Mon at base 110 speed once it evolves in the Jumpluff, making it an incredible Mon to set up with. It's not just good at setting up in trainer battles, but also for catching Pokemon too, since Sleep is so good for that. Ironically, I don't put Sleep or Stun Spore on the moveset for Jumpluff in my worst teams video. And without one of those, it's honestly genuinely kinda bad in most scenarios. However, the main reason I consider Jumpluff to still be kind of a stinker for certain type of in-game runs is because of Hoppip. Hoppip just sucks. It's bad. And in these earlier games, there isn't an overpowered version of the experience share like in X and Y, so you're pretty much screwed. You just gotta do it the old-fashioned way. But if you want an interesting utility grass type, then it's definitely far more rewarding than I originally let on. I think I saved the most topical one for last. Because with the new trailer for Pokemon Legends ZA, we saw that one of the starters was in fact Chikorita. And Chikorita's evolution line deserves more respect. It's not a secret that I actually like Meganium, so there is a little bias here. No, in current gens, it isn't anything special. Having little presence, and in terms of strength, it's pretty outclassed by Feraligatr, who has aged the best among the Johto starters in the modern games. Even by the Johto remakes, Feraligatr takes the spotlight overall in my opinion with the special physical split. But in Gen 2? Well, Meganium is in a similar position as Jumpluff, where its qualities don't immediately jump out at you the way Typhlosion does, for example. But it has a lot going on. It had utility like Jumpluff, including healing, but lacked the speed with only bulk and solid defenses to make up for it. But it also had some really weird niches like being able to learn Swords Dance, which was still uncommon back in Gen 2. Though I would suggest not going in with the physical set over something that includes Leech Seed and Synthesis. The main problem for Meganium that makes folks see it as a forgettable choice compared to the other two starters is just the lack of consistent, strong, iconic attack. You're pretty much stuck with Razor Leaf for Grass Stab unless you want to do Solar Beam shenanigans. No Surf or even Flame Wheel. Sure, you could give it Earthquake, but are you really gonna give Earthquake to Meganium? It's good with Swords Dance, but chances are you're giving that to something else. But even just healing, plus support moves along with Razor Leaf, is surprisingly really good as you get deeper in the Johto and later the Kanto postgame. It's generally a little better than Jumpluff and much easier to use in your in-game playthrough compared to the other grass types. The one issue is that Typhlosion as a fire type covers more ground for you since there are few available in GSC and even Heart Gold and Soul Silver. And Typhlosion is a little better in Gen 2 in particular. Feraligatr in Gen 2 is more debatable. It definitely gets stronger, but it does feel a bit flat near the end of the game due to its weird physical stats and potential need to wear HMs depending on how you want to handle those. It's still an easy candidate for the best of the 3 in the remakes though, especially if you don't feel like using Gyarados. But yeah, I respect Meganium, it's just not in the upper tier of starters, but it definitely deserves more love. Here's to hoping ZA does something really cool with it, Megaform or not. And those are some Pokemon from Johto that I think deserve better. Are there any you guys would personally mention that I didn't put in the video? Any underdog experiences while using any of these mons in any of the games? Will you be giving Chikorita a shot in Legends ZA? Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below.